In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, the town of Arbor Hill was the kind of place where everyone believed they knew their neighbor's business. The population barely scratched 2,000, and it was the sort of town where gossip was passed as easily as the Sunday sermon. This insular world sat far from any major highway, nestled in a valley that hugged the misty forest-covered hills like a secret. Its charm was timeless old brick buildings, a general store that hadn't changed its layout in decades, and the Archer family farm, which sat at the town's edge like an old sentinel watching over the quiet life below. Luke and Liam Archer were born into this world, identical twins whose paths in life seemed to be set from the moment they drew their first breaths. The Archers were well known in the region for their sprawling family farm, a property that stretched for miles and had been passed down for generations. Their father, Robert Archer, was a no-nonsense man with calloused hands, hardened by years of toil in the fields, while their mother, Margaret, was a kinder presence, soft-spoken, devout, and beloved by everyone. Together, Robert and Margaret had carved out a stable life, the farm thriving under their care. When the twins were born in 1991, it was as if the town collectively took a breath, waiting to see if they would grow into the legacy left by their forefathers. Luke and Liam, indistinguishable to most, grew up in tandem, two sides of the same coin. They were so alike in appearance that people joked they were mirror images of one another. Yet their personalities couldn't have been more different. But Luke, the firstborn by 6 minutes, had always been the more charismatic of the two. He possessed an ease with people that his brother did not. From a young age, Luke commanded attention, whether it was in the schoolyard, in Sunday school, or later in town meetings. He had his father's work ethic, but his mother's easy grace, making him the golden boy of Arbor Hill. By the time he reached his late teens, Luke had become the face of the family farm, shaking hands with buyers at markets, organizing events, and representing the Archers at the annual county fair. And Liam, on the other hand, was quieter, more introspective. He preferred the solitary work of farming, spending long hours in the fields or repairing equipment in the barn, far from the chatter of the townspeople. He didn't crave attention or admiration like his brother, rather. He seemed content to exist in Luke's shadow. In school, teachers noticed that Liam often deferred to Luke, allowing him to speak for both of them. Even as they grew older, it was Luke who pursued relationships and formed connections, while Liam seemed withdrawn, observing life from a distance, where, though their personalities diverged, their bond was undeniable. Growing up without their parents had only strengthened it. Tragedy had struck the Archer family when the boys were 12, and their father died in a hunting accident. It had been a senseless tragedy. Robert Archer, a skilled hunter, had been out with friends when a misfire from another's rifle had taken his life. The loss hit the family hard, but Margaret had been the glue that held everything together. But for 2 years she raised the boys on her own, working the farm alongside them, even as her own health began to decline. Then, in 2005, Margaret was found dead in her bedroom. The official cause of death was an accidental overdose on her anxiety medication, though the townsfolk whispered about foul play. Margaret had always seemed frail after Robert's death, but few believed she would have been careless with her medication. No one had any solid evidence to the contrary, so the town mourned her passing, and the twins were left to fend for themselves. At just 14, Luke and Liam had been thrust into adulthood. The farm became their entire world. They inherited not just the land but the weight of generations of Archer responsibility. With no other family to guide them, they were left to figure out how to manage the farm on their own. Despite their age, the twins rose to the challenge, working together to keep the farm afloat. Yet it was clear to those around them that Luke was the one who took the lead, making the decisions, while Liam followed in his brother's wake. For years, the twins lived in quiet, seemingly content isolation. The farm thrived, and Luke's reputation in town grew even stronger. He became a fixture at town events, always the one to offer a helping hand or a warm smile. As time went on, he started to take on a more prominent role in the community, even considering a run for town council. Liam, meanwhile, kept to the background, his presence at public events growing increasingly rare. It wasn't that Liam was disliked, far from it. People admired his hard work and dedication to the farm. But his reticence made it hard for anyone to truly get close to him. By their late 20s, the twins had settled into a routine that seemed unshakable. They had never married, though Luke had been linked to a few women in town over the years, none of whom stuck around for long. As for Liam, no one knew much about his personal life. Rumors circulated that he might have had a secret girlfriend, or that he was simply uninterested in relationships. No one ever asked him directly, and Liam never volunteered any information. Beneath the surface of their seemingly harmonious life, however, there were cracks that no one in town could see. The bond between the twins had grown increasingly strained over the years, though neither of them spoke of it openly. Luke, ever the golden child, had started to feel the pressure of his public persona. He had grown restless, chafing against the life he had built in Arbor Hill. The farm had begun to feel like a prison to him, a weight that held him back from something bigger, something more exciting. Liam, on the other hand, had grown even more reclusive. He spent long nights out in the barn, working on projects that he never explained to anyone. The few times Luke had tried to ask his brother what he was up to, Liam had brushed him off, retreating further into his own world. There was a tension between them now that hadn't existed in their younger years, a sense that something was festering beneath the surface, something that neither of them could fully confront. It was in the spring of 2018 that things began to take a darker turn. Luke had started spending more time away from the farm, going on long trips to the city without explanation. He claimed that he was looking into new markets for their produce, trying to expand the farm's reach, but Liam wasn't convinced. There was a distance between them now that had never been there before, a distance that Liam couldn't bridge, no matter how hard he tried. The truth was that Luke had been leading a double life. For years he had been involved in secret relationships with men he met during his trips to the city. It wasn't something he could ever admit to in Arbor Hill, where the conservative, traditional values of the town wouldn't allow for such things. He had carefully constructed his image as the upstanding, hard-working farmer, and any deviation from that image would have been disastrous. So Luke had kept his secret hidden, indulging in his desires only when he was far from the prying eyes of Arbor Hill. But Liam, of course, had no idea about Luke's secret life, though he had sensed for a long time that something wasn't right. He had always felt that Luke was hiding something from him, and that feeling of being left out gnawed at him. It was as though the bond they had shared for so long was fraying, and no matter how much Liam tried to hold on to it, it was slipping away. It was in the early summer of that year that Liam finally discovered the truth. He had been cleaning out the barn when he came across Luke's old laptop, something he had never paid much attention to before. Luke had always been the one to handle the farm's finances, and Liam had trusted him implicitly. But that day, curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to look through the files on the laptop. What he found would change everything. There, in a hidden folder, Liam discovered dozens of emails, messages, and photos that Luke had exchanged with men over the years. Some of the messages were explicit, others more emotional. They all revealed a side of Luke that Liam had never known. At first, Liam was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His brother, the man he had idolized for so long, had been living a lie. It wasn't just the fact that Luke was gay that shocked Liam, it was the realization that Luke had kept this part of himself hidden for so long, that he had never trusted Liam enough to tell him the truth. In the days that followed, Liam became consumed by anger and confusion. He didn't know how to confront his brother, how to deal with the betrayal he felt. It wasn't just the secret that hurt him, it was the fact that Luke had excluded him from such an important part of his life. For as long as Liam could remember, he had followed Luke's lead, trusting him implicitly. Now, that trust was shattered, and Liam didn't know how to move forward. The tension between the twins reached a breaking point in late June. Liam, unable to keep his emotions in check any longer, confronted Luke one evening after dinner. The two of them had been sitting in the farmhouse kitchen, the sun setting over the fields outside. Liam had tried to bring up the subject carefully, but his anger got the best of him, and soon the conversation turned into a heated argument. "I found your messages," Liam spat, his voice trembling with rage. "All those emails, all those photos. You've been lying to me for years, Luke. How could you do this? How could you keep something like this from me?" Luke's face went pale, his fork clattering to the table. For a moment he was silent, the weight of his brother's words sinking in. But then, to Liam's surprise, Luke's expression hardened. "This isn't about you," Luke replied, his voice cold. "This has nothing to do with you. I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't understand. You've always lived in this bubble, this small-town world where everything is black and white. I didn't want you to judge me." "Judge you?" Liam's voice was incredulous. "I'm your brother, Luke. I wouldn't have judged you, I would have helped you. But you didn't even give me the chance. You've been living this double life, lying to everyone, and for what? To protect your image? To keep up this perfect facade?" Luke stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't get it, Liam. You never have. You think everything is so simple, but it's not. I had to keep this hidden. You have no idea what it's like to carry that weight, to live with that secret every single day." Liam stood too, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You think you're the only one who's been carrying a burden? We've been in this together, Luke, since the day we were born. But you cut me out. You left me in the dark." Like the argument escalated from there, the two brothers shouting at each other, years of pent-up resentment and frustration spilling out. But it wasn't until Liam said the words that would seal their fate that everything truly changed. "You're a coward, Luke," Liam said, his voice filled with venom. "You're not the man I thought you were. And I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that." Luke's eyes blazed with anger, and for a moment it seemed like he might hit his brother. But instead, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the house, leaving Liam standing in the kitchen, his chest heaving with emotion. For days, the two brothers didn't speak. Luke avoided the farmhouse as much as possible, spending most of his time in town or on trips to the city. Liam, meanwhile, retreated into himself, spending long hours out in the fields, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. It was in the early hours of July 18th that everything came to a head. On that fateful night, the farmhouse was eerily quiet. The windows were dark, and the only sounds that could be heard were the distant calls of owls in the forest and the rustling of the wind through the trees. Inside, Liam lay awake in his room, his mind racing. He couldn't sleep, hadn't been able to since the confrontation with Luke. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his brother's face, the anger and hurt etched into his features. Suddenly, Liam heard a noise downstairs. At first he thought it was his imagination, but then he heard it again, a faint creak, like someone moving through the house. His heart began to pound in his chest as he sat up in bed, straining to listen. Slowly, Liam got out of bed and made his way to the door, his bare feet padding silently across the wooden floor. He opened the door just a crack, peering out into the dark hallway. There, at the end of the hall, he saw a shadow moving. Someone was in the house. For a moment, Liam froze. His first thought was that it might be Luke, coming home late from one of his trips to the city. But something about the figure in the hallway didn't feel right. It moved too slowly, too deliberately. Liam's pulse quickened as he grabbed the baseball bat he kept by his bed, a habit he'd picked up after their father's death. He stepped into the hallway, his senses on high alert. The floor creaked under his weight, and the shadow froze. "Who's there?" Liam's voice was low but filled with tension. The shadow at the end of the hall paused for a moment, then started moving again, slowly retreating down the stairs. Liam's heart raced as he gripped the bat tighter and followed. His mind churned with possibilities. Was it an intruder? Or was Luke creeping around in the dark for some reason? He needed to know. The house felt oppressive, the silence only punctuated by the faint sound of footsteps ahead of him. His palms slicked with sweat, Liam forced himself to descend the stairs, each step sending a fresh wave of adrenaline coursing through him. He reached the bottom, turning toward the living room, and saw a figure standing near the fireplace. In the dim light from the moon outside, he could just make out Luke's face, pale, tense, and unreadable. Liam exhaled, the tension in his chest easing for a split second, but then he saw something in Luke's hand. A knife. The familiar steel gleamed in the faint light, a large kitchen knife they used for butchering. Liam's voice was cautious, as if he were trying to calm a wild animal. "What are you doing?" Luke's eyes were shadowed, the usual easy charm gone, replaced by something colder, darker. He didn't answer at first, just stared at the knife in his hand, as though mesmerized by the object. "I thought you were sleeping," Luke said finally, his voice strangely detached. "I heard something," Liam said, still gripping the bat tightly. "Why are you holding that?" Luke's eyes flickered up, meeting his brother's. For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension between them was palpable, thick like the summer humidity that clung to the air. "Yeah, 'cause I need to end this," Luke said quietly. Liam's stomach twisted. "End what? What are you talking about?" Luke took a step forward, and instinctively Liam raised the bat, though he wasn't sure what he intended to do with it. He didn't want to hurt his brother, he just wanted answers, to understand what had happened to the man he'd once idolized. "All these years," Luke began, his voice bitter, "I've lived a lie. For you. For this town. I've carried this weight, and I can't do it anymore. I can't pretend to be something I'm not." Liam took a cautious step forward, lowering the bat slightly. "You don't have to pretend. I know, Luke. I found your messages." "I know you did." Luke's voice grew sharp, almost accusatory, and now everything's out in the open. All the secrets. I can't live like this. "You don't have to," Liam said, his voice shaking. "We can figure it out. We'll talk to people. We can leave Arbor Hill if that's what you want. You don't have to carry this alone." But Luke shook his head, his grip on the knife tightening. "You don't get it, do you? You've always been so simple, so content with your little life. But me? I've been suffocating, and you're part of the reason I stayed trapped here. You're part of the reason I couldn't ever be free." Liam blinked, his heart sinking. He hadn't expected this, hadn't realized the depth of Luke's resentment. "I didn't know." "And of course you didn't," Luke spat. "You've never had to deal with it. All those years I kept this secret for you, for Mom, for the damn farm, and now it's too late." "Luke, don't do this," Liam pleaded, stepping closer. "We can fix it." Luke let out a bitter laugh. "Fix it? You think we can fix this? There's no going back, Liam. Not for me." Before Liam could respond, Luke lunged forward, the knife slashing through the air. Liam instinctively swung the bat, catching Luke's wrist and knocking the blade to the ground with a loud clatter. For a moment, the world seemed to stop as both brothers stared at each other in shock. "Look, Luke," Liam began, but before he could finish, Luke lunged again, this time tackling him to the ground. The bat slipped from Liam's hand, and the two brothers grappled in a violent struggle, years of buried emotion spilling out in a chaotic burst of energy. Luke's hands found Liam's throat, squeezing tightly as Liam gasped for breath. His vision blurred, his chest heaving as he struggled to push Luke off. He clawed at his brother's arms, but Luke's grip was unrelenting, fueled by years of anger and frustration. With a surge of adrenaline, Liam managed to twist out of Luke's grasp, sending his brother sprawling to the side. Both men scrambled to their feet, panting heavily, their eyes locked in a deadly standoff. "Up!" Liam shouted, his voice hoarse. "This isn't you, Luke. This isn't who you are." But Luke didn't listen. His face contorted in a mix of rage and desperation, he lunged for the knife again. In that moment, Liam knew that if Luke reached the blade, one of them wouldn't make it out of that room alive. Without thinking, Liam dove forward, tackling Luke to the ground again. Impact sent both men crashing into the coffee table, shattering the glass top. Liam felt a sharp pain in his side as a shard of glass embedded itself in his skin, but he ignored it, his focus solely on the knife that lay just inches away from Luke's outstretched hand. With a desperate cry, Liam grabbed the knife first, his fingers curling around the handle. For a moment, time seemed to slow as he stared down at his brother, who was now lying on his back, gasping for breath. Luke's voice was weak, his eyes wide with fear. "Don't." But it was too late. The knife plunged downward, slicing through the air with a sickening force. The blade sank into Luke's chest, and for a moment the room was filled with the sound of Luke's ragged breaths, the gurgling of blood as it spilled from the wound. Liam stared in horror, the knife still in his hand, as his brother's eyes flickered and then went still. The weight of what he had done crashed down on him like a tidal wave, leaving him gasping for air. He had killed his brother. And the silence that followed was deafening. Liam's mind raced, his hands trembling as he dropped the knife to the floor. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never meant for this to happen, had never meant to hurt Luke. But now it was too late. There was no going back. But for a long time Liam stood there, staring down at Luke's lifeless body, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The room was bathed in moonlight, the shattered glass and the blood-stained floor creating a haunting scene of violence and death. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Liam moved. His legs felt like lead as he stumbled toward the front door, his mind blank. He didn't know where he was going, didn't know what he would do next. All he knew was that he had to get out of there, had to escape the scene of the crime, the house that had once been his home. But as he reached for the door handle, something stopped him. A voice, soft and broken, echoed in his mind. "You're a coward, Luke." The words replayed over and over, a mantra of guilt and regret. Liam's hand fell to his side as he turned back to face the living room. He couldn't leave. Not like this. The weight of the situation finally settled over him. He had killed his brother. The thought was unbearable, a crushing sense of responsibility that he couldn't shake. Liam sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he sobbed uncontrollably. There was no escape now, no running away from the consequences of his actions. Hours later, when the police arrived at the Archer farmhouse in response to Amanda Price's frantic 911 call, they found Liam sitting in the middle of the living room, cradling Luke's lifeless body in his arms. The knife lay discarded beside them, a silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded in the quiet farmhouse. Liam offered no resistance as the officers handcuffed him and led him away. He didn't speak a word, his mind numb with shock and despair. He barely registered the flashing lights of the police cars, the curious faces of the neighbors who had gathered outside, whispering amongst themselves about what had happened. As Liam was driven away from the farmhouse, he knew that his life would never be the same again. The bond that had once united him with his brother had been severed in the most violent way imaginable. And now he would have to live with the knowledge that he had taken Luke's life, his twin, his other half. And the trial was swift, and the verdict was clear. Liam was sentenced to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder, with the possibility of parole after 15. The judge had shown some leniency, citing Liam's remorse and the complexity of the relationship between the brothers, but the sentence was still harsh. As Liam sat in his prison cell, staring at the walls, he thought of Luke every day. The image of his brother's lifeless eyes haunted him, a constant reminder of the moment when everything had gone wrong. No matter how much time passed, Liam knew he would never escape the guilt that consumed him, the weight of his actions bearing down on him like an unbearable burden.